26 past the hour. The White House says President Biden is, quote, reviewing next steps when it comes to preemptive pardons. This comes after NBC News confirmed today that Biden was discussing preemptive pardons for Trump critics to protect them from possible retribution. Names include, but are not limited to, figures like Senator-elect Adam Schiff, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Joining us now, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. So, Peter, you were one of the first to confirm these discussions of pardons. What do conversations look like right now?
Well, it's mainly happening at the staff level as part of a larger conversation about what pardons and commutations the president will choose to do before leaving office. Every president, generally at the end of his time in office, has extended, clemency to usually a large swath of people, often, everyday criminals or, nonviolent drug offenders and so forth who've gone through a process. This obviously would not be the same thing. This would be a whole different kind of thing. We've never seen anything quite like this. It hasn't yet reached the president for a decision, although he has discussed this with his senior aides, we're told. But they're kind of weigh the advantages and disadvantages. On the one hand, they think that they should have an obligation, perhaps, to try to protect some of these people who are being persecuted, in their view, simply for doing their jobs and for speaking the truth or for getting on Trump's bad side, but not actually committing any crimes. On the other side, there's an argument to be made that it makes it look like they've committed crimes. It makes it, implies that they've done something wrong and that they would need pardons. And some of the people who want these, there are people who want these pardons, and there are some people who say, look, I wouldn't take it because I don't want the implication.
And Peter, just how was the process for the president to go from he is not going to pardon his son or a commutation to not only pardoning his son for those offenses, including tax charges and the gun charge, but also for any possible, probable crime that may have been committed since 2014? How did that process go?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't much of a process there. That was really Joe Biden and his family. And that's, in fact, one of the things that you hear from Democrats is they're upset that he didn't really involve his staff, didn't involve anybody else around him who might have given him some different advice. He didn't get advice to do it as well. We talked to Jim Clyburn, for instance, the congressman from South Carolina. He says he very much supported the idea of a pardon, told Biden that for Hunter Biden. But you're right to focus on that specific provision of the pardon. That's different. It's one thing to say, I'm pardoning you as a president does for this crime or that conviction, that specific allegation. In this case, he pardoned his son not just for the things he's been charged and convicted of, but the things he hasn't been charged with for the last 10 years. That's essentially an 11-year get-out-of-jail-free card. You don't see that very often in pardons. Really, there's no precedent for that really since Watergate, since Ford pardoned Nixon for any and all crimes, even though he hadn't been charged with them.
Yeah, and Lisa, I mean, how is it possible legally or explain that, to pardon someone for a crime that they may not even have committed?
Well, I think, Jose, whether they've committed a crime is sometimes up to debate. What matters here is whether they have committed certain conduct. And so in issuing preemptive pardons, for example, Joe Biden has already sort of done that, as Peter was explaining, with respect to his son, Hunter. The pardon that he issued to Hunter went over a 10-year period, and it was for any conduct that he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during that 10-year-plus period. And if Joe Biden chooses to do that for others, there is some ample precedent for it, not only going back to the Hunter Biden pardon, but as Peter mentioned, also with respect to Ford and Nixon, and dating back to even the beginning of the Republic. Not everybody that George Washington pardoned in connection with the Whiskey Rebellion had been tried, convicted, and sentenced at that point.
Is that, Lisa, legally, is that where it ends? I mean, a presidential pardon for any crime that you may have committed going forward, if that pardon is that way. Is that essentially set in stone?
Well, it depends on the breadth of the wording, and that's why folks like me will sit and wordsmith some of these things if President Biden decides to do them, because they want to insulate these preemptive pardons from challenge. But, Jose, a preemptive pardon is not without its own dangers. Remember, if you pardon someone, you're removing their criminal exposure in the past. I mean, for their past actions. And that means they can't invoke the Fifth Amendment, for example, with respect to that conduct if they're called upon to testify and other criminal proceedings or even before Congress. That would mean if Joe Biden were to preemptively pardon, for example, Jack Smith and others on his team, he would also be subjecting them to lengthy congressional hearings, potentially, at which they could not say, I invoke the Fifth Amendment. They may have other privileges, including the attorney-client privilege that applies to their work for the Justice Department, but it could expose other people to having to talk ad nauseum about what they have done and, of course, subject themselves to future charges for perjury if they're found not to be telling the truth.
And Peter, so what does this tell you about Biden's strategy, the president's strategy, for the end of his term? I mean, January 20th is, in a way, just right around the corner. And any talk about the president considering pardoning any other family member?
No, I don't hear any other family member being considered at this point. I think it is, though, a reaction to what they're seeing Trump do right now in putting together his administration, right? Pam Bondi is Attorney General, Kash Patel is FBI Director, assuming either or both of them are confirmed, are people who are, pretty vocal in going after people around Biden or others who have gotten on Trump's bad side. So they look at these appointments, particularly Kash Patel, who has talked about very openly, quote, we will come after, unquote, people that they believe, were unfair to President-elect Trump. And because of that, they say, well, that may justify this rather extraordinary motion of, these preemptive pardons. That Trump has signaled his desire to use the law enforcement process to take retribution, and that's, of course, President-elect Trump's word, retribution, against those who have angered him.